Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new session of the Consciousness and Reality Graduate Conference, organized by students in the Mind the Brain program, Master's Program in Cognitive Science within the Department for Theoretical Philosophy at the University of Bucharest. And we're delighted to have as a next speaker Mr. Guillermo Núñez de Vasconcelos, and many apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, from the Universidad Federal de Minas Gerais. And his talk is titled Illusion or Allusion, an ecological and active approach to virtual reality experiences. Thank you so much for being here with us, Guillermo, and please take it away.
Thank you, Andre. So hi, everyone. I hope you're hearing me well. I'd like to start by thanking the organizing committee of the Consciousness and Reality Graduate Conference for the opportunity to be here today. I will present a work developed by Professor Giovanni Rolla from Universidade Federal da Bahia, Professor Nara Figueiredo from Universidade Federal de Santa Maria, and I from Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais. And my colleagues are also here and will participate in the Q&A at the end. And this presentation is based on a paper wrote by us that's still under review. Thus, the title of the presentation isn't exactly the same, but it holds some similarities. So I'll begin by presenting some preliminary views on VR, characterizing the question of the work, that is, why so many theorists consider VR experiences as illusory, and which problems this consideration raises. Next, the central features of the ecological and active approach to cognition will be presented, and the concept of illusion in cognitive psychology explained. In the following, I will look for the relation between a person and the VR equipment from the perspective of embodiment, and therefore the focus goes to what happens in VR when one experiences it. Our argument at this point is that VR experiences are neither illusions nor cognition proper, but an as-if or make-believe experience that we name it illusion with an A. Illusion is, for us, intrinsically related to the concepts of immersion and flow. By distinguishing illusion and illusion, we can explain why we feel reality-like effects and have reality-like experiences while in VR. But we can always distinguish between virtual and non-virtual situations. Lastly, to conclude, we argue that cognition and VR experiences are fundamentally different, since cognition involves perceiving one's environment as relevant for one's self-sustainment, which is not the case in VR, unless it is understood as an illusory experience. So as many of you probably know, virtual reality is becoming progressively popular in the last years for personal use and also for research purposes as well. Experimental psychology, for instance, is increasingly used in VR, consolidating its methodological relevance. However, it is a commonly held assumption that VR experiences are illusions. This is important because even though in specialized literature one finds near an overwhelming consensus that VR experiences are a kind of illusion, with the noticeable exception of Chalmers, claims in that direction are seldom accompanied by the philosophical analysis they urgently require. We believe that clarifying the status of VR experiences can influence methodological approaches in cognitive sciences and perhaps also helps to situate this kind of activity in our lives. To illustrate the muddled conceptual waters we are facing, VR experiences are sometimes classified as immersive, a metaphor that borrows from immersion in real water. A definition provided by Murray defines immersion as the sensation of being surrounded by a completely other reality, as different as water is from air, that takes over all of our attention, our whole perceptual apparatus. However, as McMahon and Newson et al. Pointed out, immersion is a vague concept that has been used interchangeably with concepts such as presence, involvement, and engagement. The proximity between immersion and presence is critical, since the latter is usually defined in terms of or referring to illusions. The association of immersion and illusions precedes the very appearance of VR equipment. Oliver Grau presents a comprehensive panorama of immersive experiences ranging from 60 BC to the 21st century. He argues that the idea of installing an observer in a hermetically closed-off image space of illusion did not make its first appearance with the technical invention of computer-aided virtual realities. For instance, the Sensorama simulator, a booth-sized device from the 1960s that used binaural audio, projection, vibration, and a system of other projection, was described as a device that creates for its user the illusion of being physically present in a different environment. Specifically about VR, Lombard and Dighton defined presence as the perceptual illusion of non-mediation, which occurs when a person fails to perceive or acknowledge the existence of a medium in his or her communication environment, as he or she would if the medium were not there. Similarly, Gonzalez Franco and Lanier presented a comprehensive review of what they consider to be VR illusions, claiming that illusory experiences are the very foundation of operating in VR. The authors propose a neuroscientific model to explain why and how VR illusions can occur, borrowing from the predictive processing paradigm. According to them, VR illusions occur when media instrumentation stimulates neural bottom-up multisensory processing, sensory motor self-awareness frameworks, and cognitive top-down prediction manipulations, and furthermore, allow these to reconcile in such a way that semantic violations are infrequent. Thus, it is not hard to see why the concept of illusion became so central to explanations regarding VR experiences. The immersed subject perceives and acts according to what is presented in VR, ignoring to a great extent the so-called real world. The commonsensical use of illusion may offer some approximations, but there is more in the claim that VR experiences are illusory than mere common sense. The discussions are riddled with cognitivist assumptions, namely A, that perception is the reception of raw stimuli, which therefore requires B, computations over internal representations to put together those stimuli as complex perceptual states about their distal sources. This naturally leads to the assumption that C, illusion, is a kind of faulty representational process in which the received stimuli do not correspond to the actually existing distal sources. If those assumptions are correct, then it is tempting or even necessary to consider VR experiences as illusory. As mentioned, we approach cognition from two prominent branches of embodied cognition, named ecological psychology and enactivism. The former was developed by James Gibson and Eleanor Gibson during the 1960s and 70s, and enactivism was initially established by Francisco Varela, Ivan Thompson, and Eleanor Roche in the 90s. The compatibility between enactivism and ecological psychology has been widely discussed, and recent developments have shown that both share common roots and that they can be integrated in a proficient way in what we call the ecological-enactive approach to cognition, or EEC for short. The cognitivist considers that cognition is thoroughly representational, which means that our cognition needs to be supplemented by internal representations. The EEC rejects this view and claims that it is based on a misconception, namely, that cognitive agents passively receive crude stimuli about their surroundings. Furthermore, this misconception assumes that sensation comes first and that cognition and action come later. Thus, for EEC, cognition is not the representation of distal sources of stimuli, but in the organism's active exploration of its surroundings, which in turn depends on the development of sensory motor schemes. These schemes are coordinated patterns of sensation and movement selected by agents in virtue of their success in organism-environment engagements. The ecological psychology contributes to this understanding with the concept of affordances, or the possibilities for action there is non-representationally perceived by an organism in an environment. Affordances are always related to what a specific kind of body can detect and explore in an environment. Therefore, different organisms can exhibit different cognitive performances in their respective environments based on the set of affordances they can detect and explore. From the perspective of the EEC, the environment is the surroundings of an organism in relation to its capacities. Hence, cognition depends constitutively on the organism's body morphology and on the environmental layout explored by it. This strong form of embodiment and situatedness supported by EEC show that mental representation does not play any explanatory role for the organism, can explore the world directly without internal mediation. The emphasis on the relevance of continuous engagement of organisms and environment for cognition stems from the fact that the living beings are thermodynamically open systems in far from equilibrium conditions, which means that they must interact with their environments through the detection and exploration of affordances and inhibitions to maintain their functional organization. The organism makes sense of their environment by interacting with it and identifying the balance of environmental encounters, which is fundamental for their self-maintenance. Another key feature of EEC is the idea of organism-environment co-determination, which refers to how organisms develop strategies to engage with specific environmental features at an ontogenetic scale. Niche construction theory, which has been recently linked to organism-environment co-determination, affirms that if an organismic activity in a given environment is sufficiently stable, it becomes a non-genetic or ecological inheritance to its descendants. The altered environment affects how the organism's descendants engages with it, ensuring a loop that, at a large time scale, influences the species' evolutionary pathways. In the case of hominins, co-determination involved the manipulation and cumulative development of artifacts. Our existence is intrinsically linked to the cumulative use of culturally shared artifacts, essential to the development of increasingly cognitive performances that are distinctive to humankind. Human-made niches involve the object's physical structures, their affordances, their social function, and the behavioral patterns that are socially enacted when engaging with them. In short, behaviorally modern human nature is culturally embedded. To recap, it is important to consider cognition as embodied and situated for action, and that the organism's cognitive performances are explained by its evolutionary background and its historical interaction with the environment. In our case, the distinctively human cognitive capacities are linked with the manipulation and incorporation of technological artifacts. Now we can turn our attention to the question of illusory experiences. From the cognitive psychology perspective, which is based on cognitivist assumptions, representationalism plays an important role. Among the definitions of illusion presented by the American Psychology Association dictionary, we find illusion as false sensory percept or misrepresentation of sensory stimuli. As we can see, the question of representationalism rejected by EEC is at the core of the traditional understanding of illusion. The EEC approach to illusion to which we adhere to is provided by Favela and Quemedo, and the authors emphasize the mutual constitution of perception and action for ecological psychology and EEC by an extension. And the actions an animal is able to perform in a given environment depends on its morphological features, hence on its evolutionary background. Perception thus occurs when an organism performs certain actions with success within an environment with evolutionary appropriate conditions. For instance, humans can discriminate the distance between objects and their point of view by moving. Through parallax, we can identify what is closer from what is further away without recurring to internal computations or representations. Within this conception of perception, illusions are conceived in contrast to perceptual states, being therefore defined by Favela and Quemedo as attempts to perceive in evolutionary atypical conditions. To illustrate, let us take, for instance, our attempts to visually perceive objects across different media, such as air and water, which causes us to mislocate submerged objects. A famous case of the stick in water illusion under specific conditions is a genuine illusion for EEC. That is, we did not evolve to retrieve information for action across different media. At first, we may fail to see that the stick is not broken. However, if the human agent is not restricted to just observing the stick, but is able to manipulate it, take it out of water, etc., then the impression of illusion is gone. Another example, the Muller-Lyer illusion, which persists even if one measures the object's length, can be explained in a similar way. Bidimensional figures are seldom encountered in real-life cases, and for this reason can be considered as evolutionary atypical. Bidimension illusions assume that the observer is located at infinity and is able to perceive that image in its integrity, which is straightforwardly evolutionary atypical for beings like us. Even after measurement, one line still seems bigger than the other one. As a matter of contrast, imagine two TV antennas resembling monoliner lines and an agent with the practical task of storing them into a cardboard box. The manipulation of the antennas to accommodate them in the box dispels any possibility of illusion about which antenna would fit in the box or any doubt about which antenna is bigger, etc. The difference between these last examples is that the agent is able to engage with the objects instead of observing them from a fixed standpoint. So now let's look for the VR devices to ask what goes on at the level of the individual wearing VR equipment. Our main point of contention is that we can use VR equipment so prolifically only because we are easily coupled with technological devices. Technology here is understood broadly. It includes both the first material engagements that helped to shape our evolutionary pathways, as well as more recent developments, as it is in the case of VR devices. As we mentioned before, our evolutionary history is the history of thinking and doing through material means, which involves the cumulative increment of culturally shared artifacts. Through the manipulation of technological devices, we perform unprecedented cognitive acts and enhanced our inherited and developed capacities. Under certain conditions, the manipulation of devices can be described as a matter of embodiment. Embodiment from a phenomenological point of view is related to how the successful manipulation of tools or equipment enable the user to abstract from some of its features during use. In other words, the user is able to perform actions with the apparatus as if the object was part of their own body. In a sense, the object gets temporarily integrated into the user's cognitive system and it becomes transparent. That is, it ceases to be perceived as and it becomes a means to perceive with, as Malafudis argues. From a complex system perspective, the individual, a self-organized system, is integrated with the tool, and when coupling with the environment, it can potentially generate new ways of exploring this environment or modifying previously existing ways. The process of coupling with VR equipment requires a process of onboarding, as Hofhannissian and colleagues called it. This onboarding happens as individuals manipulate VR equipment, such as head-mounted displays, HMDs, and the controllers in order to wear them. During the onboarding, there is a moment before the coupling when one is able to see the virtual environment by using the HMD, but the controllers are not yet worn, and the digital hands are beyond the user's body usual limits. To use a phenomenological distinction, the visible parts of the digital body are not yet perceived as lived body or a source and location of experiences. Then the agent orients his physical hands, which are until now invisible, towards the location of the controllers represented by the digital hands in order to couple with them, to make them to be perceived as parts of his own body. As Hofhannissian and colleagues explain, the coordination between physical and digital body requires the gradual development of sensory-motor mastery. Thus, from the progressively development of this mastery, the headset as blindfold eventually becomes a headset as a window into the virtual world. When the physical qualities of the headset and the interface recedes into the background of an individual awareness. Conversely, HMD unplugged on a table is not a window, but rather a rather expensive and impractical blindfold. In a recent book, Reality Plus, Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy, David Chalmers claims that VR experiences are not illusory, but he foresees some exceptions. One of the cases he discusses is an imaginary one in which someone puts a lightweight HMD on a sleeping person as a prank, and when they wake up, they supposedly have the illusion of being somewhere else. That is, Chalmers' example holds its pertinency only if we ignore that the user has to actively manipulate and wear the equipment for VR experiences to be a source of illusion. However, if we grant Chalmers' imaginary HMD as uncommonly lightweight, which is necessary for the putative illusory character of his example, it is hard to see how illusion could last. The pranked individual could easily perform a series of gestures that would reveal the presence of the equipment, such as trying to touch his own face. In fact, it seems that the only way this example supports the claim that VR experiences are illusory is under the assumption that perception is static, and then one could pinpoint a certain moment, a fragment of a perceptual event in which the individual would falsely believe that they are somewhere else. But again, this snapshot conception of perception is straightforwardly rejected by EEC, since perception and action are intrinsically related. Now, given the definition of illusion as a failed attempt to perceive in evolutionary atypical conditions, we can conclude that cases of embodiment with technological devices are not illusory in any way. Instead, manipulating cultural artifacts is exactly what made us behaviorally modern humans. We still embody technological devices, which enables us to think through and with them. Those include, for example, pen and paper, notepad, computers, cell phones, etc. In this sense, to engage with VR technology is not radically different from wearing glasses or using a cane. It's obvious that VR allows us to experience a glimpse of fascinating imaginary worlds, but its use is fundamentally the same as other devices that we incorporated into our lives and allows us to experience things differently. Thus, it represents an addition to human evolutionary history rather than something alien to it. That is, there is nothing evolutionary atypical in engaging with technological devices, VR included. That being the case, it is false that VR experiences are only possible due to the supposed fallibility of our perceptual systems, an assumption that goes hand in hand with the idea that VR experiences are illusory. So, in order to encompass the fluid and immersive character of VR experiences, without attributing to the subject the sort of perceptual failure typically associated with illusory states, we coined the concept of allusion. Allusion, in its common usage, means an indirect and often playful reference for something else. For example, one could say that this tweet alludes to the president's stupidity, and they are alluding to its gaffe, etc. Someone with sufficient contextual information can implicitly understand allusion without needing to be directed explicitly to what is being alluded. Similarly, in the context of our discussion, a person who has mastered the relevant sensory motor skills can act in VR as if what they are experiencing is in fact happening outside of VR. Thus, by allusion, we mean the activity to access the virtual environment as if it were non-virtually present. It is noteworthy that this kind of engagement is not a mistaken or failure of the perceptual system, but a matter of letting oneself go. The Latin radical of allusion, ad ludere, best captures the spirit of our proposal. Letting oneself go is a matter of volitional play rather than being misled or eluded. The volitional element at play in allusion is precisely what explains why we can distinguish VR experiences from everyday non-virtual experiences. Let us step back and look at our remarks on the onboarding process again. VR is only accessible after one actively manipulates the controllers and wears the HMD, which is aligned with the enactivist account of cognition and perceptual consciousness as active exploration done by an agent in its surroundings. We only entertain VR experiences because we perform a series of actions that enable the synchronization of our physical actions outside VR with those of our digital avatar, thereby enjoying those experiences as if we were in fact there. Again, if we ignore the onboarding process and take just detached snapshots of genuine everyday experiences in comparison with graphically realistic VR experiences, we can suggest that non-virtual perceptual experiences and virtual reality experiences are indistinguishable. But this is an abstraction from how VR is in fact used. Accounting for VR experiences in terms of allusion rather than illusions allows for fruitful considerations regarding immersion, a term that is central and perhaps overused in specialized VR literature. First, it is important to note that immersion is not limited to VR experiences, being associated also with video games, in-person role-play games, narrative studies, and art studies. In the context of VR experiences, some authors use immersion in reference to the objective aspects of it, or rather conflating it with presence, that is, the feeling of being there. The multiplicity of uses contributes to making it a vague and rather imprecise concept. We propose a distinct account of immersion as an attempt to dissipate some of the confusion hovering the term, as well as restating its importance to the field. Hovhannissian and colleagues have approached the term referring to the work of the psychology Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi by considering immersion as flow. Flow can be described as a state of optimal experience in which a person is deeply and joyfully involved in a skillful activity. Its involvement with the task at hand is all that matters during that period. The person is invested in realistic goals, and the opportunities for action match with their skills. Therefore, the conception of immersion as flow focused on the pragmatic, task-related elements of VR experiences, relating them to the virtual actions and the subjective experience of meaningfulness. This definition enables us to distinguish immersion from what is usually associated with presence, namely the virtual objects and their sense of realness. Furthermore, to consider immersion as flow is aligned with EEC, since it does not presuppose the perception of a virtual world as it is, but as a continuous bringing forth of an environment through the user's exploratory engagement. The user learns to perceive what is relevant for acting in the virtual environment by engaging with certain activities within that environment. It is noteworthy that to maintain the state of flow, as Hovhannissian and colleagues advise us, the tasks available to engage with have to be recurrently slightly above users' skill level. Otherwise, the lack of challenge makes the interaction boring and therefore less immersive. Finally, immersion as flow implies that the appearance and visual fidelity of virtual elements is merely secondary for immersion. Flow state is not induced nor dependent on the strictly visual aspects of virtual elements. Moreover, to understand immersion as flow allows us to explain also why certain occurrences, such as equipment malfunctions or external interferences, can interrupt immersion by presenting obstacles to the resolution of in-VR tasks. Let us take, for instance, a VR user that perhaps bumps into a physical object during the experience of VR. When in VR, he is being presented to an open and transversable space. The significant mismatch between virtual and non-virtual environment consists of a non-systematic obstacle to the resolution of the task in question. One cannot be resolved by raising users' skill level. Therefore, immersion is disrupted, and at the limits, it can even lead to the user to disengage or to emerge from the virtual experience. These disruptive episodes can be reverted, and the user can be brought back to their previous level of immersion, depending obviously on the proper working of technology. So what is needed to explain the possibility of re-emerging? EEC foresees that to re-enter a flow of state also depends on the quality of information available for interaction, which then challenges the agent to perceive what is relevant for the virtual experience. Crucially, this also requires to act as if the virtual scenario presents actual possibilities for action. That is our main addition to Hovhannissian and colleagues' conception of immersion as flow. There is a basic level of engagement that is needed for re-immersion in VR experience, namely, acting as if the experience is real to what we call illusion. The volitional aspect of illusion is salient even if the decision to engage with VR environments is never made consciously present to the person and never fully articulated as an explicit deliberation. To summarize, it is the illusory aspect of VR experiences that enable the possibilities of being immersed and of being re-immersed if a disruption takes place. Oops, sorry. Okay, I lost my text. So just a second.
Take your time, it's quite fine.
Yes, so it always happens. Sorry. So, okay. It's the time, you know, it's almost, it's at night. So I think you are all tired. So sorry for that. So let's go. Um, well, the volitional aspect of illusion is salient even if the decision to engage with VR environment is never made consciously present to the person and never fully articulated as an explicit deliberation. To summarize, it is the illusory aspect of VR experiences that enables the possibility of being immersed and being re-immersed if a disruption takes place. Thus, immersive experiences are not explained by failures or misperceptions, but by voluntarily engaging with the available information for action as if it were non-virtual. To recap what was presented, we argue that the use of VR equipment is a matter of embodiment and that VR experiences can be understood as a matter of illusion. Our proposal is based on one of the marks of behaviorally modern humans, that is, the embodiment of cultural items. Thus, the eventual incorporation of VR equipment into our lives must not be seen as alien to our evolutionary history. These are the reasons we presented to reconsider VR experiences away from the illusory explanations, which arises from the cognitivist model of the mind. We challenge the traditional conception of illusion as mistaken percepts using the enactive ecological understanding of the cognitive processes. From EEC perspective, illusions are understood as failed attempts to perceive in evolutionary atypical conditions. Two last considerations. First, if VR experiences are not illusory, but a matter of illusion enabled by the embodiment of VR devices, it follows that our view confers ecological validity to studies using VR equipment. If VR experiences were illusory, not much about cognition proper would follow from what cognitivist scientists observe about their subjects in virtual environments. This leads us to our second point, that is, even though cognition can be studied by analogy to VR engagements, given its similarities with VR environments, there seems to remain an unsurmountable gap between them, since EEC takes cognition to be in strong continuity with biological processes. Biological systems evolved to be able to explore actively their their environment as a means to facilitate their self-sustainment. Therefore, cognition is intrinsically linked to the organism's adaptive recognition of environmental encounters that are meaningful for its viability as a living system, to what enactivists call sense-making. Plausibly, sense-making does not take place during VR experiences, but only as a matter of illusion. That is, regardless of how much a digital apple resembles a physical apple in terms of size, color, texture, etc., the digital one does not afford nourishment. One can act as if the virtual apple is nutritious, but it will not satiate the hunger of a hungry man. The hunger of a hungry man. If, however, technology evolves to allow the satisfaction of our most fundamental biological needs within virtual environments, which is very unlikely to say the least, then the very distinction between virtual and non-virtual might become meaningless. This is, of course, strictly speculative because no such progress in the near future is seen. Uh, Now, my references, and it is. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Guilherme. And I think this deserves a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And now on to the Q&A. So we already have a question from Yan Tung Li. Yan Tung, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great talk. I agree all the part of your presentation. But I want to extend your consideration one, because I myself do some experiment by virtual reality. So if these experiences that are induced in virtual context, and according to you, that's an illusory aspect. So I'm wondering if that would hinder our extrapolation from the subjective experience in VR to the subjective experience in the ordinary environment or our ordinary life. So I'm wondering how you reply to this worry.
Okay, before answering, I would like to invite Giovanni and Nada to answer this question because they are my co-authors, and so I think it would be nice to hear them too. So Giovanni and Nada, if you could please take Ian's question.
Can I just double check? What do you mean by extrapolate? I just want to make sure that I got the question.
Oh, I mean, because we, for example, when we we want to investigate our extension of bodily awareness, and we design a lot of VR contexts to maybe to induce some double body illusion, or induce some like 3 hands or 4 hands illusion, something like that. But because they are all conducted within the VR context, so if according to you these experiences are all illusion, then can we conclude that in ordinary life we could have such a kind of experience, or that would be illusory?
Yeah, I think I might not be able to grasp the deepness of your question, because I think the straightforward answer is yes. I think that there are experiments that I know, one that actually is investigating the trolley problem using VR experiments. And the idea is precisely, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, probably. The main hypothesis is precisely this, that you are living an experience as if you were actually pushing someone from a bridge. And actually the reports from that experience is that people get very stressed. Some people even cry after they realize that they just pushed someone from a bridge, even if it was in virtual reality. So they are stressed about the fact that first they reported that they would never push someone over a bridge in a case like that. But then when they are living the experience using VR, and of course there is a human size doll with human weight and human temperature and so on, and the person pushes the object, then what happens is that is very, very stressful. So I think the straightforward answer, yes, but I might not be getting precisely your point. I'm not sure.
That's clear. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. And with Sorin's permission, I'd just like to abuse my privilege as a chair and ask a quick question of my own. I'm thinking of asking this question earlier on, because I think it's sort of somewhat simple, or at least simple-minded. So, just help me get the grip of this. By the way, thanks so much for your talk. Absolutely fascinating, and congrats to you and all co-authors. If I get this right, this is going to be grossly oversimplified, okay? But if I get this right, the sort of general argument seems to be something like this. Something that a lot of people find appealing and plausible in VR settings is the experience of immersion. And the idea that of immersion as flow, or that oftentimes immersive experiences have this kind of flow component in Csikszentmihalyi's sense, cannot be accounted for by thinking of VR as illusion with an I, right? And therefore, we need to go shopping for a different perspective on VR. And the one that you and your co-authors advance is a view of VR as illusion with an A. And so far so good. I think I agree with all of that. I'm just wondering, I guess, exactly what illusion is, because sort of earlier in the talk, you talked about this ecological and enactive background. But then later, when you were talking about illusion with an A, it seemed that what mattered was that these were as if experiences in which we treated virtual reality as if it was the real thing, right? And so my first thought there was that these conditions are sort of mutually independent. so that we could treat something as if it were real without necessarily presupposing an ecological or an active perspective. Contrary-wise, we could have an ecological and an active perspective and not have the as-if component. And so I was just wondering if you could just, if any of you or jointly could tell me why this is wrong, I'd be very, very happy. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andre. Can I, Guilherme, another? Okay, so that's a great question. I think that's the gist of our proposal. Yes, we didn't frame it as a dilemma in the way you did, but I think it's a correct way. It's a correct way of putting it. That well, the idea that VR experiences are illusory doesn't fit very well with the other concepts usually, the other properties usually attributed to VR experience, such as immersion and presence. So that's correct. And I think, yes, you can have an independent concept of illusion, one that does not involve embodiment, ecological and activism, and so forth. But in that case, you need to treat illusion as involving some kind of representational state. And we opt to explain this concept that we coined for this purpose in terms of embodiment. And if I can give a more precise definition, I think would be a kind of as if mental attitude, but not necessarily one that does not necessarily involve representation and narrative and propositional attitudes. It's akin to pretend play in a way, but pretend play involves, it seems to me, it necessarily involves imagination. So when a child is pretending that certain objects are airplanes and such, they are imagining this stuff, right? And in this way, it's similar to illusion, but the difference now is that in VR experiences, you don't need to imagine something else because you are being presented, of course, through a very sophisticated designing, of course, to a given environment. So you don't need to imagine the environment happening in front of you. You are just acting as if it is there. And this, of course, if there is some incompatibility between your actual environment, let's say the space you are acting, there's something that precludes you from walking in that direction, for instance, you find a incompatibility that will hinder your experience, your VR experience. So that is to say that I think illusion, it's one kind of as if or make-believe. I don't like the idea of make-believe that much because it suggests there is already some representational states going on, but at the very least, an as if mental state. And you can have as if mental states that involve descriptions, of course. I can invite you to imagine that you are in a forest or something like that, or imagine such and such. And this is, of course, a kind of as if mental state. We are talking about a more basic one that it involves a certain letting oneself go, as Guilherme said. And in this way, I think illusion does not, although it does not need to involve, does not need to be based on ecological and active cognition, it's one way of interpreting this concept, I think.
So could I just ask a very brief follow-up? I realize we're late with time and so on, but this is quite wonderful. So I just, I feel the need to push a bit further. So so why? Here's the bluntest question of ever. So why would you need to have a unified characterization of illusion with an A? Why couldn't you just say that it's, you sort of describe it negatively, it's not illusion with an I? So this, it could be as varied as possible. Some of these illusory experiences could be closer to pretense. Some of them could be closer to imagination. Some of them could be closer to some kind of rehearsed or simulated movements, and so on. So why does there need to be this kind of unified approach to this? And just to put it sort of to put the weight on the other, well, just to shift the burden of proof a bit, what would make it wasn't at all obvious. Well, I mean, it was what you said sounded somewhat persuasive, but it wasn't sort of finally obvious to me that this was the case, that an illusory with an I approach to VR is ultimately incapable of accounting for experiences of flow, or immersive flow. Why couldn't there be illusory flow? Why couldn't there be just going along, being immersed in the hallucinatory world, put it like that, right? Yeah, and I stop here. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
That wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Those are great questions. I think I can tackle the first one, but I don't know if Guilherme and Nara would like to answer the second one. But it seems to me that it's to have a unified explanation. It is although could be defeated as such, but I think it's a theoretical virtue. So if you can propose such an explanation, it's better than not doing so. But if we can find a persuasive argument to treat illusory as a general concept that may include several different other concepts that involve, as you said, for instance, pretense and so on and so forth. Well, if there is a good enough reason, I would be okay with that as well. To be honest, I think it seemed to me that at the time we were writing our paper that to have a more precise concept would be advantageous, but it's not necessarily so. So I don't hold that idea as dear to me. But on the other hand, and their second question is if you can have an illusionary VR experience, right? I know Guilherme and Nara, would you like to answer that?
It's just, I had a comment on the first question first. I have the impression about the relation between illusion and EEC. I agree with you. We don't need EEC to have illusion as a concept. We can have it, and it can be aligned with other, even representationalist views. But I think for EEC, illusion fits very well, because it's very problematic for EEC to explain illusions without resorting to representations. So the concept of illusion comes in handy for EEC. So that's one thing that I wanted to highlight after what Giovanni said. And your last question about flow, I think I would have to come back to Hovhannissian text to give you a better answer to that. But I think we resorted to this concept because we really wanted to understand better the notion of immersion that was not working very well. But I think I'm gonna have to make a promise that I will look better into it and come back to you later.
Well, I can say a few words, but I don't want to
please
imagine that. But I don't know if Guilherme and Nara will agree with me on this, but I think that, well, because illusion refers to a kind of failure, it's weird to say that you have this, that the immersive experience refer to a kind of perceptual failure. It's not that it's impossible, it's not that it's a contradiction, but it sounds a bit awkward, because you can also describe immersive experience and flow experience as such as a kind of sensory motor success. So to the extent that you think that it's illusory, it seems to not sit very well, but it's not. I want to emphasize that I don't think it's impossible. It's just that it seems to be more in tune with our other ideas. And Nat and I, as an activist, I think he classifies as an activist as well. But if you don't, we can argue later, Guilherme. But I think it sits pretty well with other views we hold. So that's why, I'm not saying it's impossible to understand the VR experiences as illusory with an eye, but I think it's better we do not. In general, I mean, and this also touches upon something that Ian Tong said earlier on, but I don't want to extend too much. I believe you are tired, so.
All right, thank you so much for that. And it might well be good thought to come back to this in the roundtable to come. So very much appreciated. Plenty of questions to come next. I wonder, Sogin, since you've been so active in these past few meetings, if we could maybe defer to Victor and come back to your question in the roundtable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Many thanks. Victor, please go ahead.
So very brief, just want to applaud also the presentation and the work from my colleagues who are there still at the faculty. So really appreciate you all. I was wondering if the whole immersion doesn't necessarily neglect or negate the idea of illusion. So if you are having immersion, is there any space for illusion? And by the way, if this was discussed, sorry that I might have missed, my connection dropped. And a follow-up maybe to this idea for immersion. Okay, I understand you need to enter in that state of flow, and for example, touch can break that state of flow. Would you say there are certain components which are let's say critical for immersion, and also if there are such components critical for immersion, would some of them not be sensitive? So maybe I'm not phrasing this question correctly, but okay, it's easy to think of, physical touch, sight, auditory, all those sensorial type of information. Is there anything else that you're needing to have that sort of immersion? And thank you again for presentation.
Oh, great. Thank you, Victor. That's a great question as well. I think Guy can answer that from the technical aspects of the VR use. There is certain parameters that must be in place for immersion to take place. So Guy,
I don't know, because if we limit or if we discuss immersion from the perspective of the hardware or in the evolution of the sensors and etc., we will get to a point that we will have to disagree that the people in the 90s or in the 80s had immersive experiences because the hardware was worse than today. So, or even that, for example, if you are using just the HMDs and without the controllers, but if you have any kind of interaction, for example, when using more simple headsets of VR, and you don't have your hands present, maybe you have some ways to interact and to make some tasks that make it an immersive experience. For example, when you hold your gaze in a certain point and it points a timer and then does some kind of action. So what I think it's interesting in the concept of immersion as flow is that you kind of move away these things that are under constant evolution, that if you see some VR experience today and consider it very realistic, in 10 years, probably you consider that outdated. So when you think about immersion as flow, you are in a certain way putting these things aside to look into what will persist, that is the interaction of a human being with what is being presented to him, and independent of the graphical quality or if the sound is stereophonic and etc. So because these things will keep evolving all the time. And for instance, if you look at the Sensorama simulator, that example we used right at the beginning of our presentation, that is a booth-sized device that you put your hand and it vibrates to see the a video of I think it's New York passing by and etc. And you have odors and other stuff. You see that VR is not yet at that point. Okay, between quotes, but we are not yet at that point in the off-the-shelf equipment. You can buy a Quest headset and it will come with odors and etc. But we still have the immersive experiences because the kind of tasks and etc. we can do in that using that equipment is kind of potent in a way that makes us perceive it that way. So I don't know if I answered your question and if my colleagues want to complement anything.
I like that, and I also like very briefly to say, I think we have a huge propensity for being immersed. So it's just wonderful. I think we can be immersed just by looking at some of that. So that's fascinating. So thank you for the talk.
Thank you for the question.
All right, thanks so much for that. And we have a new question from Sandra.
Hi, so my question would be, how would you see the difference between presence and immersion? Would you say that immersion would share the characteristics of an altered state of consciousness as opposed to presence? Because presence is more something that I think of, you know, at the, say you are using VR to, I don't know, play a game. So presence would be at the early stages of the game. So before you actually engage in any sort of interaction.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's very hard for me to answer that because immersion and presence are terms that are almost used interchangeably from time to time. If you take the classic literature about it, you see people defining immersion in terms of presence sometimes. So I think the definition of presence that we are adhering to is that the presence is related to being there, like the feeling of being there. So it's not necessarily, if we look at immersion as flow, as we are proposing, the sense of being there is just one thing that does not classify as immersion, because you could be there, feel there, and you don't have any practical task to do. And when we say task, we are not saying about resolving things or doing a lot of things. Maybe just the interaction with to look, to see, and to if you could walk and etc. We are considering all these as tasks to do. So I think the main disambiguation of the term comes in this direction. Like, for example, the main use of the term presence under VR studies come from the ISPR, the International Society for Presence Research, and they use it as a short term for telepresence. So it is. I think it's different from the philosophical use of the term presence at all. So it's very it's from this perspective that I think I could answer you. I don't know if it's enough.
Yeah, no, it was clarifying for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Sandra and Diego, for answering. I wonder if there are any questions or final comments. I see a comment from Giovanni. Thanks so much, Giovanni, for being here with us and for supporting Diego and Naga. Your joint work is absolutely fantastic. That said, please join me once again in thanking Guillermo and collaborators for a wonderful talk.
Thank you very much.